Hi, I am a bit late today. I was busy chatting with a member, but it's okay. I'm sure those of you who have been following, you will still find me online somehow. Yes, I'm back to my favorite church in Thailand, the SDA Chinese church, and we've been talking about Sabbath. This afternoon they asked me to talk about God's justice and fairness. Does God really play fair with humans? Or does he make up his mind and we have no say in the matter? You see, there are different views about destiny and destination, about how God really works. Some people believe in predestination, so you cannot argue with God. God is God. He decides whatever he wants to. Who are you, created piece of pottery, to argue with the potter? Even in the Bible we have such verses. On the other hand, we find a lot of the prophets questioning God's actions. Habakkuk did it. Isaiah did it. Jeremiah did it. They wondered if God was always doing the right thing. But I guess it's in the book of Psalms that we see this most frequently. When things don't go well with us, who is responsible? Am I responsible? Is it Satan's fault? Is it God's fault? Now, if God is God, which means that he has power over everything, then isn't he ultimately responsible? If he is the sovereign, the ruler, then isn't he responsible by virtue of that? Now, some Christians are not comfortable with that idea, and so they'd like to blame the devil. So the devil made me do it kind of concept. I had a classmate in college who was fond of using that argument. What most of us don't like to do is to accept responsibility, to say, it's my fault, I'm the one who did it. It's so much easier, there's some kind of turning around so you can see parts of this church. It's much easier to say it's someone else's fault, particularly if that someone else is the bad guy. So we blame Satan because we can't bring ourselves to blame God. But there are times when we realize that surely this is a higher power involved. It's not just the devil. Is it God's fault? And so when we look at some of the geopolitical events that are happening right now, some of the climate change events that are happening right now, whose fault? The ocean levels are rising. Is it God's fault? The polar caps are melting. Is it God's fault? The wiping out of bio ecosystems, is it God's fault? Global warming, is it God's fault? Pollution, is it God's fault? What about moral degradation? All these movements with philosophies that place so much interest on the human person. Is it God's fault? Is woke philosophy God's fault? Or any other kind of ethics for that matter? Or is God so silent that he just kind of leaves it up to us? Do what you like, guys. Never mind. It doesn't matter to me. In the end, I will decide who's good, who's bad. So you have no say in the matter anyway. Or do we? Why does God constantly seek to cajole, to persuade, to invite, to call? Why do we have verses like, seek the Lord, call on the Lord, ask the Lord, come to me? You are invited to this wedding. You're invited to this banquet. Is God responsible for the good things in life and not the bad? Well, Job didn't think so. He thought God was responsible for both. But is God really responsible for every bad thing that happens, which may be caused by our own action or inaction? We also know there is a cosmic drama at the backdrop, where there's a challenger to God's sovereignty, to God's authority, to God's power. And so surely he has to bear some of the responsibility. And yet, in a very real sense, we can say that God is responsible. Now, we may not like the word God is at fault, because it has such a negative connotation. But God is responsible for his creation. He created this world, he created humans. And if things go wrong with that creation, as the creator or the manufacturer, he is culpable. Is he not? Is that a fair argument? Or is that too heretical to sacrilegious for some people, and so therefore we just accept everything that comes from God's hand? I believe that the truth lies somewhere in between. We know that the devil is playing havoc with human life. We know that humans make improper and incorrect decisions and get themselves into trouble. But we also know that God is ultimately fully in charge. He is the sovereign, He is the king. He is the one who really controls everything that happens. And yet that control is not absolute in the sense that it makes God a tyrant or a dictator. And yet ultimately He is responsible. So even when we make mistakes, God is still responsible for our lives, for our redemption, for our salvation, because He is our creator. Salvation is a meaningless concept without creation. And so we have to see this in a more nuanced sort of way. That some people might think of God being at fault for everything that's wrong with life, yet we do carry some responsibility because we make the wrong decisions and do the wrong things. And Satan is clearly a pest, a troublemaker in the background, behind everyone's life, behind human history, behind the cosmic struggle. But you see, to suggest that God carries no responsibility whatsoever, we would have to become deists who believe that God created and then He just left everything to itself to sort it out. That's not the God of the Bible, the God I worship, the God I teach about. This God, He is in full control. The world is mine, He says. Everyone and everything in it is mine. When it goes wrong, it is still my world. When things go well, it is still my world. And so in a sense, He may not control us at a micro level, but He definitely controls history, controls even our personal lives at a more macro level. Because He knows the end from the beginning. He knows what tomorrow will bring, and none of us can claim that knowledge. He's also got all the power to correct things, to change things, to alter things when they go wrong. And so God is not at fault in that negative connotation of the term, but He is at fault in that positive sense of being responsible. He is responsible for my life. So even when I make mistakes, God is still in control. And this helps to explain the confidence that Bible writers have in this God. Isaiah says that the weak, or rather the young, will grow weak and tired, but those who trust God will have power like eagles with wings to fly. Paul, sitting in prison, says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We are never disconnected from that power. But we must recognize who ultimately holds responsibility for that power. God doesn't just throw His power out to anything and anyone, but He exercises it in a way that benefits every single person. You see, God has to look after the affairs of the billions of people that live on this earth, plus the rest of the universe. See, it's not just about my life. It's not just about my troubles. It's not just about my questions. It's not just about my problems. It's everyone else's. And somewhere in that mix, we may not find all the answers we urgently seek. We may not discover all the solutions that we think we need right now. But somewhere in that mix, God is still working things out. Romans 8:28 says that in everything God works for the good of those who love Him. That is God's fault. His ultimate fault, negatively or positively. Because He will neither let us go, nor will He simply leave us alone to fail. And so you and I are beneficiaries of this God and what He's willing to do. He takes responsibility. He provides strength. He provides encouragement. He provides shelter. He provides protection. But He also gives us wisdom. And so He sometimes leaves us to figure things out. And when we do that, we may make mistakes. And He may have to come in to compensate for our mistakes, for our failures. And I hope that if you keep that in mind, we won't worry so much about, is this God's fault? Is this Satan's fault? Is this my fault? We will understand that in the mix of these powers, if you like, divine power, evil power, or personal power. God is working things out for our good. Now, if we can trust that promise, then it really doesn't matter whatever else happens to us. Everything will be well with our souls. In the words of that great hymn, it is well with my soul. Why? Because this is the God that guides our lives, that provides for our lives, that sustains our lives, and that will lead us to eternal life. Have a blessed Sabbath. Have a blessed week ahead. God be with you and grant you all the blessings that He sees fit and necessary for your life. Shabbat Shalom.